I watched in horror as the rain dissolved my student. Not metaphorically, not figuratively, literally dissolved, their outer membrane liquefying under what humans consider a light spring drizzle. The screaming still haunts me, a high-pitched warble that cut off with a wet gurgle as their translation device shorted out. That was 6 months ago, during my first attempt at teaching galactic survival skills. Now, watching 12 new alien diplomats descend from their shuttle onto the landing pad of Terran tactical training. I could only pray I'd learned enough from that tragedy to keep them alive through day one. Looking a bit tense there, Mike, Doc said beside me, his prosthetic leg whirring softly as he shifted his weight. The containment field is holding steady. No earth rain getting through to melt anyone today. I nodded, but kept my hand near the emergency shield controls. Just remember what the briefing said. Their environmental suits can only handle 1 hour of exposure to our atmosphere before filters need changing. We have to get them inside before then. The shuttle's boarding ramp extended with a pneumatic hiss, and I got my first look at our newest class. They were a motley assortment of beings, even by galactic standards. 3 tall, crystalline Pyrexians glided down first, their faceted bodies refracting the morning sunlight. Behind them came a cluster of amorphous Blobthulians, their gelatinous forms secured in transparent containment spheres. The remainder were a mix of species I recognized from the pre-course briefing: 2 spindly arachnodons, 4 tentacled quickslacks, and bringing up the rear, Ambassador Vicrix's insectoid form, mandibles clicking as they observed. Doc stepped forward, but I caught his arm. Wait, something's wrong. The Pyrexians had stopped at the bottom of the ramp, their crystalline bodies vibrating in what I recognized as distress. One of them pointed a faceted appendage at the ground, where wisps of steam were rising from the landing pad. I muttered, quickly cycling through atmospheric data on my tablet. The pad heated up too much in the sun. It's over their maximum contact temperature. Doc was already moving, pulling up the landing pad's cooling controls on his own device. On it, activating the emergency coolant system. I watched the temperature readings anxiously as supercooled liquid nitrogen circulated through channels beneath the pad's surface. The steam dissipated, but the Pyrexians remained frozen in place, probably trying to determine if it was safe to proceed. "Honored guests," I called out, my words being fed through the translation matrix. "Please remain in place while we adjust conditions to your specifications. Your safety is our primary concern." The Blobthulians burbled what I hoped was agreement, their containment spheres bobbing gently. Ambassador Vicrix stepped carefully around the group, approaching us with measured steps. "Instructor Chen," they clicked, their translator rendering the sounds in crisp English. "I trust this delay will not impact the training schedule." "Not at all, Ambassador. This is already part of the first lesson, proper environmental assessment before proceeding." I tried to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "We'll have everyone safely inside within the hour." The ambassador's antennae twitched in what might have been approval or skepticism. With Vicrix, it was always hard to tell. A warning chime from my tablet drew my attention. The atmospheric sensors were picking up an approaching weather front. We had maybe 20 minutes before the containment field would be tested by actual rain. "Doc," I said quietly, "how's that cooling coming?" "Surface temperature approaching acceptable range for Pyrexian biology. Another 2 minutes." I did some quick mental math. 2 minutes for cooling, 10 minutes minimum to get everyone across the pad and through decontamination, leaving barely any margin for error before the rain hit. Not ideal, but we'd trained for tighter scenarios. The first Pyrexian finally took a tentative step onto the cooled surface. When they didn't immediately show signs of stress, the others followed. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Excellent," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Now, we'll proceed in groups. Pyrexians first, followed by Blobthulians, then Arachnodons and Quickslacks. Ambassador Vicrix will bring up the rear. Remember your emergency protocols if anything feels wrong." We began the careful process of shepherding them toward the facility's main entrance. The Pyrexians moved with deliberate grace, their crystalline bodies chiming softly with each step. The Blobthulians rolled their containment spheres along smoothly enough, though one nearly lost control on a slight incline. That's when the first rumble of thunder reached us. The effect was immediate. The arachnodons chittered in panic, their spindly legs skittering on the pad's surface. One of the quickslacks released a cloud of defensive spores that set off 3 different atmospheric alarms. "Remain calm," I called out, fighting back memories of dissolving flesh. "The containment field will protect us from any precipitation. Please maintain your current pace." Doc was already moving to help the Blobthulian who'd fallen behind, while I split my attention between the approaching storm and the various biological monitoring feeds on my tablet. The quickslack spores were fortunately being contained by their environmental suit, but the arachnodon's vital signs were spiking dangerously. We were halfway to the entrance when the rain hit the containment field. The sound of droplets striking the energy barrier sent another wave of panic through the group. I watched in growing concern as the Pyrexians' outer layers began to crystallize defensively, slowing their movement even further. "Doc," I called out, "status on their atmospheric filters." He checked his readings. 40 minutes remaining for most. The quickslack who released spores is down to 35. Not good. Not good at all. We needed at least 20 minutes for proper decontamination once inside, and at this rate. Another crack of thunder, closer this time. The containment field flickered momentarily a warning red. My hand tightened on the emergency shield controls. "New plan," I announced. "Ambassador V. Crix, I need your help. The Pyrexians aren't going to make it at this pace." The ambassador stepped forward, mandibles clicking rapidly. "What do you propose, instructor?" I pulled up the facility schematics on my tablet. "There's a maintenance tunnel 20 meters to our right. Shorter distance, and we can control the environment more precisely." I didn't mention it would put us dangerously close to the containment field's edge. V. Crix's antennae waved in what I chose to interpret as agreement. "I will inform them of the change." The next few minutes were controlled chaos. Doc and I worked with V. Crix to herd the group toward the maintenance access, all while monitoring a dozen different environmental readings and vital signs. The Pyrexians moved faster once they understood the plan, their crystalline forms catching flashes of lightning in beautiful but terrifying ways. We were almost there when disaster struck. One of the Blobthulians' containment spheres developed a hairline crack, probably from the earlier fall. Their gelatinous form began to distort as Earth's atmosphere seeped in. I didn't hesitate. "Doc, get the others inside. Ambassador, with me." Racing to the Blobthulian, I pulled an emergency containment patch from my kit while simultaneously activating my personal shield. The alien's surface was bubbling alarmingly where our atmosphere touched it, but they were holding together better than my previous student had. "Hold still," I instructed, trying to line up the patch with the crack. V. Crix helped steady the sphere while I worked, their stronger exoskeleton providing better support than I could manage alone. The patch sealed with a hiss just as another thunderclap shook the landing pad. The containment field above us flickered again, longer this time. I could smell ozone. "Move," I shouted, helping roll the sphere toward the maintenance access where Doc was waving frantically. We barely made it through before the storm hit full force, rain hammering against the containment field with enough force to make the energy barrier visibly ripple. The maintenance tunnel was cramped with all of us inside, but at least it was climate-controlled. I ran a quick check of the group, while Doc started preliminary decontamination procedures. The Blobthulian with the cracked sphere was shaken but stable. The arachnodons had huddled together in what might have been fear or comfort. The quickslack's tentacles were still twitching sporadically, but their vital signs were normalizing. "Is everyone all right?" I asked, getting various gestures and sounds of affirmation through the translation matrix. "Good. Because that, honored guests, was your first practical lesson in Deathworld survival." Doc looked up from his medical scanner with a grin. "Not bad for day one. No casualties, minimal environmental exposure, and only one containment breach, which was handled promptly and effectively, Ambassador Vikrix added, their mandibles moving in what I'd learned was approval. Though perhaps we should discuss alternative landing protocols for future classes. I nodded, already making notes on my tablet. Agreed. We'll need to adjust the pad's thermal shielding for the Pyrexians, and maybe look into backup containment systems for the Blobthulians. As we waited for decontamination to finish, I studied our students more carefully. They were scared, yes, but I could also see curiosity in their various sensory organs. The Pyrexians were examining their crystallized outer layers with what appeared to be surprise, perhaps at how quickly they'd adapted to the thermal stress. One of the Quixlax was quietly testing their environmental suit's new spore filter settings. They were learning, adapting, surviving. Maybe, just maybe, this class would make it through the full course. Right, I said, pulling up the day's schedule. Once decontamination is complete, we'll proceed to the main facility for your atmospheric acclimation briefing. After that, Doc will cover basic Earth meteorological phenomena, focusing on why exactly our rain tries to dissolve most of you. The Blobthulian with the cracked sphere rippled in what the translator rendered as nervous laughter. Perhaps we could start with less immediately lethal weather. Unfortunately, Doc replied cheerfully, on Earth, there's no such thing as completely safe weather. That's why you're here to learn. Speaking of which, wait until we cover what humidity does to crystalline life forms. The Pyrexians chimed in alarm. I smiled despite myself. 6 months ago, I'd watched a student dissolve and nearly quit teaching altogether. Now, looking at these 12 brave or foolish beings who'd volunteered to learn survival from Deathworlders, I felt something I hadn't expected, hope. They might just survive long enough to learn how to thrive. First, though, we had to get through decontamination. And after that, well, they still hadn't experienced their first earthquake. Welcome to Earth, class. Try not to die. The problem with teaching aliens how to survive is that sometimes they start surviving things you didn't expect. This is impossible, Doc muttered, reviewing the latest test results on his tablet. Their adaptation rates are off the charts. Look at this, Mike. I leaned over his shoulder in the monitoring room, studying the data from our students' morning exposure session. 1 month into the course, and the numbers were indeed startling. The Pyrexians' crystalline structures now showed a 47% increase in thermal resistance. The Blobthulians had developed selective membrane permeability that let them filter Earth's atmospheric toxins. Even the Arachnodon's exoskeletons were showing subtle changes in composition. Could be equipment error, I suggested, though I didn't believe it. We'd triple-checked everything after the first anomalous readings 2 weeks ago. Not unless every sensor in the facility is malfunctioning simultaneously. Doc pulled up a comparison chart. These changes shouldn't be possible, not at this speed. Evolution doesn't work this way. I watched through the observation window as Ambassador Vikrix supervised the afternoon class. The Quixlax were practicing their new environmental suit's emergency protocols, their tentacles moving with increasing confidence through the complicated sequences. No signs of the panic they'd shown that first day in the rain. Maybe evolution works differently when you're teaching it, I said. Doc snorted. That's not how any of this works. You can't teach evolution. Tell that to their cellular structure. I pointed to another reading. The Blobthulians shouldn't have survived yesterday's acid rain exposure test. Their containment spheres failed 2 minutes in. Exactly my point. They should have dissolved like your first student. Instead, they developed localized hardening responses almost instantly. Doc ran a hand through his graying red hair. The Galactic Council is going to have questions. As if summoned by his words, my tablet chimed with an incoming priority message. Ambassador Vikrix was requesting an immediate meeting. Speaking of questions, I sighed. Keep monitoring the afternoon session. I'll handle this. I found Vikrix in their private quarters, their insectoid form hunched over a communication terminal. Multiple screens displayed what looked like very angry alien officials. Instructor Chen, Vcrix clicked as I entered. We have a situation. The adaptation rates. Indeed. The Paraxian Collective is particularly concerned. Their representatives were not meant to develop thermal resistance. They believe we are somehow artificially modifying their biology. I'd been expecting this, but it didn't make it any easier. We're not doing anything except teaching them to survive. Everything else is their own body's response to controlled exposure. Vcrix's antennae twitched. Nevertheless, they are demanding an immediate end to the training program. The Blobthulian Unity concurs. They fear their diplomats are becoming too resilient. Too resilient? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. They sent them here to learn survival skills. They expected theoretical knowledge, protocol training, not biological adaptation that could fundamentally alter their species. Vcrix's mandibles clicked rapidly. There are concerns about potential contamination when they return home. I thought of the progress our students had made, the pride in their achievements, the way they'd started helping each other during crisis simulations, Paraxians using their enhanced heat resistance to shield Blobthulians, Quixlax deploying protective spore clouds to cover arachnodons. They're not just surviving now, I said quietly. They're thriving, working together. Isn't that what the Galactic Council wanted? What we wanted and what we created may be very different things. Vcrix turned back to the screens. I must report to the Council. Until then, all practical training sessions are suspended. I left Vcrix's quarters with a growing sense of unease. In the main hallway, I nearly collided with one of the Paraxians gliding past. Instructor Chen, they chimed, their crystalline form refracting the overhead lights in new patterns. Is everything all right? We noticed the afternoon session was cancelled. I was saved from answering by a sudden rumble that shook the facility. Earthquake sensors blared to life as the tremors intensified. Level 4 seismic event detected, the facility's AI announced. All personnel proceed to designated safety zones. The Paraxian didn't panic. 1 month ago, they would have crystallized in fear at the first tremor. Now, they merely adjusted their stance to better distribute their mass. Safe Zone C is closest, they noted calmly. Shall we proceed there together? Before I could respond, Doc's voice crackled over my communicator. Mike, we've got problems in Lab 3. Containment failure imminent. Lab 3, where we kept the most volatile Earth samples for controlled study, right next to the Blobthulian dormitory, I realized with horror. How long? Minutes, maybe less. Quake damaged the primary containment field. If those samples get out... I was already running, the Paraxian gliding swiftly beside me. Alert the others, I called to them. Get everyone to the safe zones. Except the Blobthulians, they chimed back. They may be needed. I wanted to argue, to insist they all evacuate, but they were right. If the samples breached containment, the Blobthulians' new atmospheric resistance might be our only chance to contain the spread. We reached Lab 3 to find Doc and 2 Quixlax already there, working to stabilize the failing containment field. Through the reinforced window, I could see cracks spreading through the sample tanks. Status, I demanded. Field at 12% and falling, Doc reported grimly. We've got atmospheric contamination in 3 minutes, full breach in 5. Another tremor shook the facility. Warning lights flashed as more cracks appeared in the tanks. The Blobthulians are on their way, the Paraxian announced. They've left their containment spheres behind. I spun to face them. They what? We've been practicing, one of the Quixlax explained, tentacles working quickly over the controls. In secret. Testing our limits. Before I could process that revelation, 3 Blobthulians oozed through the ventilation system, their amorphous forms moving with surprising speed. Without their spheres, their surfaces rippled and bubbled on contact with Earth's atmosphere, but they didn't dissolve. Containment field critical, the AI warned. Breach imminent. Everyone back, I ordered, but our students ignored me. The Blobthulians pressed themselves against the lab's sealed door, their bodies forming a living barrier. The Quickslacks released careful bursts of their newly modified spores, creating an additional filter layer in the air. The containment field failed with a crackling surge of energy. Sample tanks shattered. Earth's most corrosive materials sprayed toward the door and hit a crystalline wall. The Pyrexian had moved faster than I'd thought possible, their body expanding and restructuring into a transparent barrier. Caustic liquid splashed against their surface, causing tiny fractures that immediately sealed themselves. Fascinating, Doc breathed, scanner whirring. They're all working together. The Blobthulians are absorbing what gets through the crystal matrix. The Quickslack spores are neutralizing the airborne particles. Less analyzing, more helping, I snapped, rushing to the emergency containment controls. With the immediate crisis contained by our students, I had a chance to activate the backup systems. It took 20 minutes to fully secure the lab. By then, the earthquake had subsided, leaving us to deal with its aftermath and the questions it raised. "You've been practicing without your safety equipment," I said later, once we'd gathered in the main conference room. It wasn't a question. The Blobthulian who'd first developed the membrane adaptation rippled apologetically. "We needed to know our true capabilities. The spheres were becoming restrictive." "We all did," one of the arachnoidans added. "The Pyrexians helped us understand how to trigger rapid adaptations. The Quickslacks taught us about chemical response optimization." I looked at Doc, who seemed torn between professional outrage and scientific fascination. "This goes against every safety protocol we established." "With respect, instructor," the Pyrexian who'd helped me chimed. "Your protocols assumed we would remain as we were. We have not. We are changing, evolving, because of you." "Because of your teaching methods," Doc corrected, still taking readings. "Something about the way you structure the survival training is accelerating their adaptive responses. Not just physically, but mentally. They're learning to innovate, to cooperate across species." Ambassador Vikrix chose that moment to enter, their antennae rigid with what I recognized as stress. "The Council has reached a decision. All students are to be immediately quarantined pending evacuation." Protests erupted from all corners of the room. The Blobthulians rippled indignantly. The Quickslack's tentacles writhed. Even the usually stoic Pyrexians chimed in discord. "We cannot leave," the lead arachnodon chittered. "Our training is not complete." "Your training has already exceeded all expected parameters," Vikrix clicked back. "You were meant to learn survival protocols, not undergo biological evolution." "The protocols wouldn't have saved us today," a Quickslack argued. "Only our adaptations did that. Only our cooperation." I stepped forward. "Ambassador, they just prevented a major containment breach. Without their changes, without their teamwork, we'd be dealing with a facility-wide disaster right now." "Which only proves the Council's concerns valid." Vikrix's mandibles clicked rapidly. "You have created something unprecedented, potentially dangerous. They must be studied, understood, before." "Before we can teach others," the Pyrexian interrupted. All eyes turned to them. "That is the real concern, is it not? Not that we have changed, but that others will want to change too." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. I thought about the Galactic Council's original goals for the program, about species learning to survive hostile environments, about breaking down barriers between different races. "The Council fears revolution," Doc said quietly, "cultural as much as biological." Vikrix's antennae drooped slightly. "There are many who believe some species should remain as they are." "You mean vulnerable," I said, memories of my first dissolved student surfacing. "Dependent. But that's not why they came to us. They came to learn how to survive. We're just teaching them more effectively than anyone expected." The ambassador studied each student in turn, noting their changes, their confidence, their unity. Finally, their antennae lifted in what I'd learned was resignation. "I will inform the Council that evacuation may be premature, After all, the students did just demonstrate the practical value of their training and their ability to handle emergency situations. Relief rippled through the room, literally in the case of the Blobthulians. But Vikrix wasn't finished. However, all future training sessions must be fully documented. We must understand exactly how this process works, and they turned to me. You must prepare for more students. Many more, once word of this spreads. I thought of the challenges ahead, the diplomatic tensions, the responsibility of guiding not just survival training, but apparently evolution itself. We'll need a bigger facility, Doc mused, and better containment systems. And we need to finish teaching this class first, I interrupted. Speaking of which, I turned to our students. Training room in 10 minutes. Let's see what else you've been practicing in secret. As they filed out, Doc caught my arm. You're taking this remarkably well. I watched the Pyrexian help a Blobthulian navigate a narrow doorway, their crystalline surface automatically adjusting to provide better support. They're not just learning to survive Earth, I said. They're learning to survive together. Maybe that's the most important lesson we could teach. Doc nodded thoughtfully. Theory and practice. Theory and practice, I agreed. Now come on. I want to see what happens when we put them through the volcanic simulation. Behind us, I heard Vikrix mutter something that the translator rendered as, "The council is going to hate this." They probably would. But watching our students head to training, changed but unbroken, stronger together than apart, I couldn't bring myself to care. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones you never meant to teach. They came to us as diplomats. They'll leave as survivors. Assuming, of course, they survive the final exam. Solar flare incoming, the facility AI announced with inappropriate calm. Estimated impact in 15 minutes. Warning, primary radiation shielding compromised. I stared at the alert displays, trying to process how everything had gone wrong so quickly. The final examination was supposed to be a controlled crisis simulation. Instead, we had an actual crisis that threatened to cook our students alive. Tell me this is part of the test, Doc said beside me, his prosthetic leg whirring as he paced the control room. Tell me Vikrix and the council planned this. If they did, they didn't tell me. I pulled up the facility's structural integrity readings. They weren't good. The last earthquake had done more damage than we'd realized. Status on the emergency bunker? Sealed off by debris from the quake. We'd need hours to dig through, even with the Pyrexians helping. Doc checked another screen. Regular shielding is at 43% and falling. We've got maybe 20 minutes before radiation levels become lethal for most species, including humans. But I was more worried about our students. After 3 months of training, of evolution, of learning to survive Earth's worst, had we prepared them enough for this? The door burst open as Ambassador Vikrix rushed in, antennae vibrating with agitation. Instructor Chen, we must evacuate immediately. The council has dispatched emergency transport. Won't arrive in time, I said, showing them the atmospheric readings. Solar flare effects will make high-altitude transport impossible in 10 minutes. We're grounded. The ambassador's mandibles clicked rapidly. Then we have failed. The students. The students are implementing survival protocols, a crystalline voice announced. We turned to find the lead Pyrexian in the doorway, their surface refracting emergency lights in complex patterns. If you would care to observe. They led us to the main training hall, where I stopped in shock. Our students had transformed the space into something extraordinary. The Pyrexians had restructured themselves into a series of interconnected crystalline domes, their newly evolved properties allowing them to filter different radiation wavelengths. Inside, the Blobthulians had spread themselves across the floor and walls, their adapted membranes pulsing as they processed and neutralized harmful particles. Remarkable, Doc breathed, scanner whirring. They've created a layered defense system. The crystal matrices are channeling radiation through specific paths where the Blobthulians can absorb it safely. Not just absorb, one of the Quickslacks noted, tentacles moving precisely over a makeshift control panel. We're helping them convert it. Watch. They released a carefully modulated burst of spores into the space between crystal layers. Where the particles met absorbed radiation, they sparked and transformed into a protective fog. The arachnodons calculated the exact chemical composition needed, the Quickslack explained. We've been practicing energy conversion techniques since the containment breach. I turned to Vikrix, whose antennae had gone completely still. Still think they haven't learned enough. Before they could answer, another tremor shook the facility. Warning klaxons blared as more structural damage reports flooded in. Radiation shielding critical, the AI warned. Breach imminent in multiple sectors. How many can your shield protect? I asked the Pyrexian. They chimed thoughtfully. Current configuration can shelter 22 beings of average mass. More if the Blobthulians continue increasing their absorption efficiency. I did the math quickly. 12 students, plus Doc, Vikrix, and myself, plus the 5 support staff still in the facility. 20 people total. Get everyone inside, I ordered. Doc, grab all the portable medical equipment you can. We don't know how long we'll need to hold out. What about the tertiary containment systems? Doc asked. If we could reroute power. Another alert cut him off. Warning. Solar flare magnitude exceeding previous estimates. Impact in 8 minutes. We scrambled to gather supplies and personnel. The Pyrexians expanded their crystal shelter to accommodate everyone while maintaining structural integrity. The Quickslacks worked with the arachnodons to optimize their radiation conversion formula. Through it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. This is too perfect, I muttered, watching our students work seamlessly together. The timing, the exact combination of threats. You suspect the council arranged this? Vikrix asked quietly. Didn't they? The ambassador's antennae twitched. I was not informed of any such plan. However, there were discussions about needing a true test of the program's effectiveness, about proving whether Deathworld survival training could produce practical results. They hesitated. Some council members expressed concern that simulated crises would not provide adequate data. The implications sank in just as the first radiation wave hit. The crystal shelter hummed as it filtered the deadly energy, Blobthulian membranes pulsing faster to keep up with the increased load. They couldn't just trust the test results, Doc said, catching on. They needed to see it in action, see if the students could save themselves, save us. And if they couldn't, I demanded, if we all died from radiation exposure, then the program would be deemed a failure, Vikrix clicked softly, and no other species would be encouraged to develop such adaptations. I wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at the council's callous experiment with our lives. But there wasn't time. The shelter was starting to strain under the radiation assault. Crystal matrix stability at 60%, one of the Pyrexians reported. Absorption systems approaching maximum capacity. The Blobthulians rippled with effort as they processed more radiation. The Quickslacks released another spore burst, but the protective fog was forming more slowly now. We need to reduce the load, an arachnodon chittered. The conversion rate isn't sustainable. That's when I noticed Doc running calculations on his tablet, his face grim. Mike, look at these numbers. The radiation isn't just passing through the crystals, it's being focused. He was right. The Pyrexian structure wasn't just filtering radiation, it was creating channels, like a lens. Most of it was being safely converted, but some was building up in concentrated pockets. Can we vent it? I asked. Not without compromising the shelter, a Pyrexian chimed. We're maintaining structural integrity through precise energy distribution. Any disruption. Another radiation wave hit, stronger than the last. The crystal walls vibrated ominously. A Blobthulian's membrane suddenly ruptured, causing a cascade of emergency responses from the others to contain the breach. Matrix stability at 40%. The Pyrexian updated. We cannot maintain this configuration much longer. That's when I saw it. The pattern in the energy flows, the way the radiation was being channeled. All we needed was a conductor, I said. Something to safely draw off the excess energy. I turned to Doc. The prosthetic. How much charge can it handle? His eyes widened. You can't be serious. Even if it could channel the radiation, the feedback would. Would it work? He ran the numbers. Yes, but it would overload catastrophically. Anyone holding it would. I was already moving. Show me where to connect it. No. Doc grabbed my arm. You'll die. Better than all of us dying. Besides, I managed a grim smile. What kind of survival instructor would I be if I wasn't willing to demonstrate practical techniques? That will not be necessary, Vikrix interrupted. We turned to find them removing panels from their exoskeleton, revealing complex cybernetics underneath. My diplomatic augments have better conductivity than a standard prosthetic, and my species evolved to handle higher radiation loads. Before I could protest, they stepped to the position Doc's calculations had indicated. The Pyrexians immediately began restructuring, creating a channeling matrix around the ambassador. Warning, the AI intoned. Final radiation wave approaching. Impact in 20 seconds. Ambassador, I started, but they cut me off. I helped design this test, they clicked. It is only right that I help prove its success. Their antennae moved in what I finally recognized as pride. Besides, I have learned something from your students as well. Sometimes survival requires sacrifice. The wave hit. Energy coursed through the crystal structure, through the Blobthulian's membranes, through the Quickslack's conversion fog, and through Vikrix. Their cybernetics crackled and sparked as they channeled the focused radiation safely away from the shelter. Their exoskeleton began to crack, but they held position. For 3 minutes that felt like hours, we watched the ambassador endure what should have been lethal radiation exposure. When the solar flare finally passed, they collapsed. Doc reached them first, medical scanner humming. They're alive. Barely. But these readings. He shook his head in wonder. Their biology adapted, started evolving right there at the end, just like our students. Of course it did, the lead Pyrexian chimed as they helped stabilize the shelter. They were in an environment that demanded survival. That is what you taught us, Instructor Chen. Life adapts. Life evolves. Life survives. Hours later, with rescue ships finally able to approach and Vikrix stable in Medical Bay, I sat reviewing the data with Doc. The council got their proof, he said, though probably not the kind they wanted. I nodded. The students hadn't just survived, they'd saved everyone in the facility. And they'd done it by working together across species, combining their evolved abilities in ways no one had predicted. Think they'll actually shut down the program? Doc laughed. After this, they'd have riots on their hands. Every species in the galaxy will want to know how to evolve like our students did. How to become more. He was right. We'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. Deathworld survival training wouldn't just be about learning to survive Earth anymore. It would be about learning to survive anything. About learning to change, to adapt, to grow beyond limitations. You know what this means, Doc added with a grin. We're going to need a bigger facility. I thought about our students, about Vikrix's sacrifice, about all the future classes to come. Yeah, and better radiation shielding. And maybe, he suggested, a slightly less lethal final exam next time. I smiled. Where's the fun in that? After all, they don't call it a Deathworld survival course for nothing.